Hello, I'm Bruce DePuy. Coming up, a White House under siege, a president struggling to keep the focus on his second-term agenda. We'll talk with a man who knows a thing or two about second-term scandals, former Clinton special counsel Lanny Davis.
From News Channel 8, this is NewsTalk with Bruce DePuy.
The Obama administration is distracted, or so it would seem. A trio of controversies, Republicans and right-wing media calling them scandals, have the White House off message and on the defensive. If these matters linger and continue to dominate media coverage, the president's already small window for getting his agenda through will shrink that much more. Lanny Davis is with us. Lanny, of course, served as special counsel to Bill Clinton after the controversy surrounding the Monica Lewinsky scandal flared. His new book is called Crisis Tales: 5 Rules for Coping with Crises in Business, Politics, and Life. Welcome back.
Thank
it
you,
is
Bruce.
Always great having you here, and the timing to have you here today really is fantastic.
You
Thanks for
mean
coming
every
in.
day there isn't another scandal? This is the book that keeps being relevant.
Amazing timing. I had to have been coincidental in part because no one could have seen all this coming. As we sit here now, as we observe this sort of early second-term moment, call it scandal, don't call it scandal, there's no denying that the White House is on the defensive and distracted, at least because the media is focusing on other things than the president's agenda.
Look, the reason I wrote this book, which is a series of true stories from Martha Stewart to Charles Rangel to Penn State of situations that I handled, is because of exactly what the White House is facing. When you actually look at the merits of each of the issues, they really don't have too much to worry about. Barack Obama has approval ratings that have been unchanged by these so-called scandals so far, at least. But they mishandled all 3 and could have avoided all 3 by following my rules of telling it early, telling it all, telling it yourself. In other words, they had the ability to proactively diminish the importance of these stories. Instead, they waited for the dribble to occur. Now they're in a defensive reaction mode, which is contrary to my rules.
You don't deny that having the IRS treat groups differently based on their political leanings, that is a problem no matter what your individual philosophical views, no?
Absolutely, but look at how it might have played out. I'm told that the White House counsel knew about this 2 months ago. Or at least that's what's been reported, and now it's in the New York Times, but I wrote something about this last week. Just suppose that she had told the president, I don't know what's actually in the report, but let's get ready. As soon as we get the final indication, you hold a press conference. As it's being released to the media, you denounce what happened, call for a full-scale investigation, a bipartisan committee of Congress. You get out in front, you set the agenda, you set the message. I think it plays out differently than his reacting, and then there are a lot of questions. What did you know and when did you know it?
There's no advantage in having the president not know so that it can be said that this is working its way up through the proper chain of command as opposed to getting the commander-in-chief involved? I mean, is there nothing to be said for the course they chose?
Well, I had somebody on Twitter when I made the point that at least he should have been given a heads up so that they could have made a plan and then decide what to do. You have to plan. Somebody said, well, maybe he wanted plausible deniability. If that's their explanation, that's not the Barack Obama and the transparent government that I thought we were electing. I doubt that he wanted plausible deniability when it's better to plan and get out in front so you set the agenda rather than the Republicans.
The Tea Party groups were asking for preferential treatment. If you're a 501c4, you're tax exempt and you don't have to disclose your donors. Is it possible that the folks in Cincinnati and elsewhere who were giving them the grilling were doing so out of a desire to make sure the rules were being followed? Or do you think this is a slam dunk case for people being targeted based on their views?
Well, I really want to wait for the facts before I convict anyone. There could be a crime here. There are civil rights statutes involving political discrimination and targeting that could be criminal conduct. So let's wait to see what they would say. But it was certainly dumb. If you're going to do something like this, you better be sure that it's 50-50, that you're scrutinizing liberal groups in the same number, and I mean the same number, as you're scrutinizing conservative groups. These were rogues without adult supervision, and it sounds like the Keystone Cops are going to be the ultimate answer here. Now, God forbid if anyone in the Obama White House knew and actually influenced this kind of targeting, then that is huge. That goes back to Richard Nixon. I'm confident the president would never have allowed that, but who knows down in the ranks whether anyone else knew. We just learned now, confirmed for the first time, that the White House counsel was at least informed about the investigation, if not the conclusions, 2 weeks ahead of time. And to repeat, all I'm saying is give the president a heads up if you're White House counsel, because you have to have a media and a political ear, not just a legal ear.
What was it like? I remember Bill Clinton's famous phrase, Lanny Davis absorbed the poison so the work of the administration could continue during the Lewinsky period. What's it like to be in the center of the swirl?
I think you also said thanks for taking the flack. So there are lots of metaphors. I used to say
I like the poison one.
The poison or being in a pool with piranhas while I was bleeding was my favorite metaphor. It's exactly that. It's extremely painful when the press is jumping to conclusions and you're trying to catch up. So I learned this rule of tell it all, tell it early, tell it yourself, not only because it's the best rule of crisis management, but almost to maintain my sanity. Because if you're in a swirl after the story is broken, there's just no way to cope with it. If you can do it ahead of time, and I used to do it by leaking proactively the story and take time to get the story written properly, balanced with all facts, good and bad in the story, it's much better on my nerves.
Are any of these trio of controversies that are dominating the headlines now scandals?
Well, the IRS could be if anyone in the White House or in the political infrastructure of the Obama campaign knew about it. That is huge. But now I don't believe so. The polls have borne out. The Benghazi story is another example where the White House had in its hands the answer to vindicate its position. It had the 14 versions of the talking points, while Susan Rice was allowed to twist in the wind, and Republicans were accusing her of making up the expression spontaneous demonstration. Now that we've seen all 14 versions, the one sentence that was unchanged across all 14, this is a fact not well reported yet. The CIA wrote this, undisputed, are the phrase spontaneous demonstrations inspired by Cairo. That came from the CIA, not from Susan Rice, not from the campaign, not from the White House. Yet they didn't get that story out until just recently, when they finally put out the 14 version talking points after being pushed to do so by, guess what, leaks to the media. So back then I'm wondering, again, why not be proactive rather than reactive?
Your ties with the Clintons, particularly with Hillary Clinton, go back so long. I'm almost reluctant to ask this question, but Benghazi seems to be a great way if you're looking ahead to 16 and you're worried about 16 from a Republican perspective, that another history-making, almost once-in-a-lifetime political animal is going to step forward and capture the public's imagination the way Barack Obama did and the way I think Hillary Clinton might. Tough for you to answer this, but as I say, what a great way to bring her down a peg by saying she was worried about spin and not lives leading up to and after Benghazi.
You know, the American people are pretty smart, and they sense when there's a partisan exploitation of a tragedy that makes no sense and is unfair. So when Ronald Reagan had more than 200 Marines killed in Lebanon, they didn't blame that on the Defense Department or the Secretary of State or Ronald Reagan, or if they did, they certainly understood. It's hard to anticipate that. When George Bush had 19 attacks on embassies around the world, they didn't demand Condoleezza Rice's resignation. Hillary Clinton, unlike what I just did, took the responsibility, no ifs, ands, or buts, commissioned a report by Ambassador Pickering and Admiral Mullins, and the harsh conclusions she accepted without any ifs, ands, or buts, without any explanations that I just gave you. She practiced crisis management 101. I don't think it's going to hurt her a bit.
And Mitt Romney seemed to be trying to make political hay out of the situation while the flames were still being doused and while the bodies were still on the ground. If there was a case to be made about failure to have adequate security in that compound, or how the administration was portraying it relative to the quote real facts, I think the timing doomed that strategy to defeat. You've got to sort of focus on the loss of life first and come out with the politics second. Otherwise, it looks so craven, and I think from a GOP perspective, it tainted the entire discussion of this going forward. I think the public looks at it as just the parties doing what they do, argue, fight, and quarrel. And
worse, exploiting a tragedy of deaths. Just let's remember, my first rule of crisis management in this book, Crisis Tales, is get to the facts. And the facts are that this diplomatic post in Benghazi was not the embassy. And Ambassador Stevens, for whatever reason, went there without any security and knowing there was no security around it.
The book is Crisis Tales. The author, former White House Special Counsel Lanny Davis. A break here. Back with more News Talk right after this. Continuing our conversation now here on News Talk with former White House Special Counsel Lanny Davis. His book about crisis management could not be more well-timed given the headlines swirling around Washington right now and the issues the White House is trying to beat back. The book is called Crisis Tales: 5 Rules for Coping with Crises in Business, Politics, and Life. We'll talk more about crisis management and about the book in a moment, but first let me ask you about something that fascinates a lot of us. Your political and professional partnership with former RNC Chairman Michael Steele. Purple Nation Solutions.
Thank you.
Is there a room in America today for a middle ground approach? We seem so divided. We seem so at odds. Every issue comes with its talking points and its perspective baked in. Are you searching for something that no longer exists?
I sure hope that it exists, but my old friend and former client, President Bill Clinton, had an expression about the middle of the road is where the roadkill is. And Michael and I are genuinely, I'm a liberal and he's a conservative, but we are viewed as moderates because we're willing to have a conversation. Just think how sad that is. I can defend my liberal positions, he can defend his conservative positions, but we listen to each other and we look for a solution, a consensus. That's what Congress isn't doing. The American people are fed up. I think the American people being fed up means there is a big, maybe between the 30-yard lines on a football field, there's a lot of yardage where people would like to be governed from, and that's a question. I hope I'm right.
We talked about the IRS, we talked about Benghazi, talk about the Justice Department seizing records from the AP Bureau here. I think a lot of people understand in general terms how if you think that and the Attorney General said lives were at risk, and that's not an overstatement. This was a serious matter from a national security perspective. So I think some of us get, both people in the press, people outside, they get how leaking can be dangerous, and you do want to go after leaks if they meet a very, very, very high bar. But there's been a lot of concern and criticism that what the Justice Department has done in this case was really beyond what needed to occur to achieve a defendable mission, a notion.
So again, the White House missed an opportunity to do a crisis management message that solves the dilemma. There is a dilemma here, but they had the fallacy of the false choice. Choice one is interfere with the investigation and try to influence it. That's against the law. The White House can't do that. Choice two is to do what they did, which is we can't say anything. It doesn't have to be those two choices. How about this? He's the president. I can't comment on any specifics about a Justice Department criminal investigation. I'm not going to. I honor that. But I'll tell you the general principle. I'm disturbed about a broad subpoena of all the telephone records of a particular news organization. I worry about First Amendment principles. Full stop. Now, how about that as his message? Rather than saying, I didn't know anything about it, I'm not going to comment on it because I'm not going to interfere. In crisis management, you have to avoid the fallacy of the false choice, no comment or saying too much. There's a third choice.
One of his personal traits that seems to advantage him in general terms is being a laid-back kind of guy who can see the big picture and who thinks before he speaks, he thinks before he acts. Are there times where that is not helpful, where it makes him seem like a bystander or too passive?
Sometimes I think he's a little bit too clinical, and when he was with David Cameron, when this IRS story first came out, I thought he was a little bit too dispassionate and clinical in addressing it, but maybe it's because the Prime Minister from the UK was standing next to him. The next day he came out, he was outraged, and it was a day late, but it was great.
But then the public's left wondering, is the outrage genuine, or is that what was on the prompter that day?
Here's my take on Barack Obama. Every time I give him advice on how to do things better, I remember that he's a pretty darn successful politician who beat my candidate, Hillary Rodham Clinton. He's a fantastic and inspirational political leader. My own oldest son, Seth, supported him over my friend Hillary, so he had to have something special. And he's at 53% approval rating, so with all my advice about crisis management, he seems to be doing okay.
Let me ask you about a local matter. You worked with the Montgomery Police Union, the Fraternal Order of Police.
I sure did.
They had a beef with some of the rules that they were living under vis-a-vis the chief. There is now a battle royal going on in Montgomery County between Democrats, who clearly have every seat in the government at the state and local and federal, you know, Montgomery's a one-party county, and yet the Montgomery Democratic Party is at war with its unions right now. The unions boycotted the recent fundraising, and the party took in a lot less money as a result. Is it possible that the scorched earth approach is sometimes not so advisable?
So full disclosure, I no longer work for the union. I speak as a private citizen. The Democratic Party of Montgomery County and our elected officials, the county council, and my old dear friend Ike Leggett should be ashamed of themselves. And I speak as a private citizen now. They're not paying me, I'm not. Here's why. When you have an election where people are divided, you don't take public tax dollars and campaign with tax dollars against the other side. That's what they did. I think it's illegal. That's in the courts right now. There's no question it's wrong to use tax dollars to try to influence a ballot question. They say, oh, well, we were supporting our own policy. Fine. Raise the money yourself. Don't use my tax dollars. They should be ashamed of themselves for doing that, in addition to which there are absolute falsehoods in the literature that they publish, and I can prove that, but not today. So for me, the Democratic Party needs to get back to its roots and not be anti-labor.
I only have 30 seconds left. Is the White House starting to turn the corner on these issues that have dominated the news?
No question that the only one that's really dangerous, Benghazi, is old news. I think we'll see what happens on the subpoena, but the real danger is the IRS. If there's no question that there's no involvement by the White House, they'll be fine.
If you're interested in media, politics, scandal, and crisis management, we can recommend Crisis Tales. I love the other book, too, and you've already referred to the Tell It All, Tell It Early, Tell It Yourself.
Yes.
That, too, is a great read. Crisis Tales by former White House Special Counsel Lanny Davis. Great seeing you here.
Thank you so much.
As we said before, the timing is terrific. Great having you with us. We are back with a program note right after this.